Very good. Thank you very much for joining us again for this session on VLRs, voluntary local reviews, and their role in accelerating SDG implementation, of course, as part of the first edition of the SDG Cities Global Conference, which UN Habitat is co-organizing with Shanghai Municipality. Their partnership is invaluable in advancing the global debate and practices around SDGs and their implementation at the local level. So welcome again, and I want to thank in advance our panelists who will enlighten us in this session. We have a fantastic set of speakers ahead of us, and I hope you're all as excited as I am. So when we started today, we talked about a little bit about urbanization. In the opening session, we talked about how more than 50% of the world is urban already, and nearly 70% of the world's population will be urban by 2050. The Secretary General issued a policy brief last year on COVID-19 in an urban world, and spoke about how cities are the epicenter, have been the epicenter of the pandemic. Urban areas have been host to 90% of COVID-19 infections, and they have been the locus of the emergency response. But at the same time, they are also central to a recovery that is inclusive, resilient, and green. And one thing that the current emergency, the COVID emergency, but also the climate emergency and the inequality emergency, as was stated in the opening, has highlighted is that the local governments and regional governments play an absolutely critical frontline role in responding to crises, but also in driving sustainable recovery processes. So urban management and transformation is absolutely the key to building our resilience and preparing our cities and communities to face the crises that are yet to come. And indeed, this will not be the first. This is not the first and will not be the last crisis that we face on our planet. Given the current context of this multi-layered crisis, and with less than 10 years ahead to achieve the SDGs, we need to boost our action, strengthen our partnerships, and pull our resources together to meet the global commitments by 2030. It's very clear that we cannot wait any longer. We need to act now. With this in mind, the Secretary General of the United Nations launched the Decade of Action, which identified local action as one of the key levels of intervention to deliver on the global goals. In addition, in his report, recent report titled Our Common Agenda, the Secretary General recognizes the role of parliaments, cities, and other subnational authorities in promoting inclusive approaches with, for example, voluntary local reviews of SDG implementation, providing a model on which to build. Now, for those of you who have been working in the voluntary review VLR space, this is music to our ears. Voluntary local reviews and voluntary subnational reviews, VLRs and VSRs, are increasingly becoming the tools of choice of local and regional governments to monitor and report on their SDG progress. But beyond their primary reporting function, VLRs have also emerged as a dynamic, engaging process to accelerate SDG localization and implementation. The global community of local governments committed to local reporting on SDGs has been growing at an encouraging pace. We went from 37 VLRs in May 2020 to 106 in October 2021, which is like touching a 200% increase or some such number in less than a year and a half. Latin America and Europe are the regions that have been most active, with about 70 VLRs published between them. But the VLR outreach is truly global, and today we will hear a little bit about that, with more and more African and Asian local authorities either committing themselves to publish a VLR or starting to develop one already. So friends, this session wants to address the key question of what comes next, what after the report. The VLR is only a report for the United Nations. It's too big an investment with too little a return. It is a report, it is a process, but what do we do with it? There are multiple answers that can come and that must come on this question. We will learn from the experience of cities like Buenos Aires, which has submitted 3 VLRs. They must have found something useful if they've done 3. Or Espoo, which is committed to become the most sustainable cities, the most sustainable city in the world, along with speakers from Madrid, which is starting its process of its first VLR, Izmir, which has just recently launched its VLR. And we will also hear from the UN Economic Commission for Africa on how is the process going, particularly on the African continent, and why VLRs are relevant for the African continent. As important as for us at UN Habitat, as important as the outcome, the development of the VLR itself, is the capacity and the ability of the VLR to support and orient long-term sustainability visions and plans. The VLR process touches upon many critical dimensions of SDG localization, such as policy coherence, communities inclusion, and participation in multi-level governance. So how do we put the findings of the report at the service of our communities? How do we make sure that VLRs feed into concrete and transformative action? If a VLR is a co-creative process that applies a whole of society approach, it's important that it grounds its findings, brings them down to earth, and makes them relevant to people. At UN Habitat, we conceive VLRs as both a point of departure and a point of arrival. Departure because VLRs kickstart long-term sustainable efforts by identifying development gaps and SDG priorities to subsequently inform the design of policies and projects to reach those. But at the same time, VLRs are the tool to monitor and evaluate the implementation of these initiatives. So both a point of departure and a point of arrival. That said, I'm not going to say more. Allow me to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Deng Zhichuan, professor at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, who will lay the frame for us, and his presentation will be followed by a very exciting, fast-moving panel discussion, a conversation between different actors. Dr. Zhichuan has a PhD in economics, and he's professor, director of the Urban Strategy and Planning Research Office of the Institute of Urban and Demographic Studies at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. He has been engaged in research on spatial economics and urban development, and has published several monographs, papers, articles, and has numerous distinctions and awards to his credit. Dr. Zhichuan, the floor is yours.
好的，非常感谢主持人啊，这个刚才Dr. Spira 介绍了非常多的这个国际上的先进的经验，对我们上海的这个 VLR 的这个研究来说的话是非常有启发的。那么今天借此机会啊，我代表我们上海这边把上海做志愿性地方审查工作的一些情况给各位专家交流一下。那么我先把我的屏幕进行共享。大家能看到我的屏幕吗？可以吗
？Yes， 可以。
好，非常感谢。好，我今天我是刚才主持人已经介绍过了，我是来自上海社会科学院的。那么这次承担了相关的这个工作，今天主要从6个方面来分享一下，大致是评估工作的缘起，我们的评估工作的流程方法。重点介绍上海对 SDGs 的总体响应逻辑以及2021年优先审查的一些目标，最后提点展望。第一个就是评估工作缘起，大概大家都很熟悉2030年可持续发展议程，在这个框架下面，事实上全球范围不少城市，刚才主持人已经提到了，有100多个城市启动了自愿性的审查这个工作。因联合国人居所邀请，上海今年也在2021年的时候开展了这个工作。那么并在此基础上面，我们一直认为，其实联合国可持续发展目标城市这个基建项目，我们想把它作为以后也要 参与志愿性地方审查工作，把它作为一些常态化来推进。那么从上海启动志愿性地方审查工作之后，有多个努力方向。一是致力于深化上海与联合国相关机构的合作。上海是世界城市日的发起城市，每年发布的上海手册等等都已经成为联合国2030年可持续发展议程的重要一些成果文件。联合国相关机构其实开展的工作也比较不断的拓展相关的领域，增强我们上海作为世界城市日发起城市的一些责任担当。二是致力于讲好上海故事，呈现上海的发展成果，彰显中国的一些理念。第三一点就是为城市战略愿景实践建立一些可持续发展目标的坐标系，这特别是对上海来说。第四一个是增强与国际城市在可持续发展领域的双向交流合作。第二点就是我们的评估流程，大概上海首次提出来我们要做志愿审查工作是2021年启动的，跟世界上其他国家的城市相比的话，相对一定也有点晚，但是其中文版我们将在10月，就是过2天世界城市日当天发布，英文版也将在年底的时候我们会志愿上报到联合国官方网站。这项工作坚持了多机构的共同协作，就是我们邀请了近20个政府部门参与到我们现在这个专业领域的评估，坚持多领域的专家的咨询。我们成立了专家的咨询委员会，包括经济、社会、生态等相关领域的专家来组成专家委员会，对我们优先审查的目标及相关的指标选定进行讨论。我们还要坚持多渠道公众的参与，从宜居、安全、活力为这些方面去推动居民来了解我们的这个感受。所以第三一点，我们大概的评估方法就是在编制范式上面，我们积极参考了联合国人机署志愿性地方审查指南然后这个是我们的基础。参考今年6月中国发布的中国城市落实，就是我们中国落实2030年可持续发展议程国别资源陈述报告，以及国内外的一些城市相关的案例。在审查方向和指标选择方面，基于中国落实2030年的可持续发展议程国别方案，2018年中国 SDGs 指标构建及进展评估报告，围绕今年的城市日主题，并征求相关领域政府部门和专家的意见，建立起我们上海相对本地化的这么一个志愿地方审查的一个评估报告。在具体的审查内容和依据方面，参考了上海城市总体规划的实施评估，还有上海城市体检的年度报告等本地评估类报告。从我们的评估工作的技术框架来看，包括宏观和中微观2个层面。宏观层面及城市发展战略对 SDGs 的整体响应，在解构地方战略目标的基础上面，分析上海城市愿景目标与 SDGs 的逻辑关系，梳理上海推动 SDGs 17个目标的关键措施。中微观层面及优先审查的一些目标，建立核心指标体系，并进行评估，分析目标的总体进展，总结我们目标推进的关键举措，展示我们的典型案例。那么接下来的第4点就是我们的响应逻辑。从我们针对上海现阶段的城市总体规划，最右边的是上海我们的城市总体规划2017到2035。然后左边是我们联合国的 SDGs 的17个指标，所以我们对它进行了一个一一的对应的关系。我们可以看出来，上海提到的更具活力的繁荣创新之城、更富魅力的幸福人文之城，以及更可持续的韧性生态之城，这3个目标与可持续发展的3大目标经济、社会、环境，它基本上可以非常好的可以对应起来。在此基础上面，我们建立了一个城市发展的3个分目标与17个 SDGs 的目标之间的大致的响应关系。由于 SDGs 每个目标内涵均较为丰富，因此只呈现我们主要的响应关系。 繁荣创新之城，我们大致可以响应体现体面工作和经济增长的目标；幸福人文之城主要响应无贫穷的目标。3个分目标均与 SDGs 17这个相关的促进目标实现的伙伴关系存在主要的响应关系。所以进一步的说，我们梳理了一下近年来上海在推动可持续发展方面的主要举措，建立了上海响应可持续发展17个目标的实践框架体系。可以看到，在 SDGs 每个目标下面，我们总结提炼了3到6个领域的关键指标，这是上海这几年的实践。从第5点，我们可以，这些大家可以看一下，这个是我们整个的梳理，大致浏览一下。好，第5块就是我们2021年的优先审查目标，结合上海近几年我们的实践的重点，以及2021年世界城市日主题，就是提高城市的气候适应能力。今年我们自评估工作确定了7个优先审查的目标，一个就是 SDGs 1，第1个无贫穷 ，SDG 3良好健康与福祉 ，SDG 4优质教育，还有 SDG 8体面工作和经济增长 ，SDG 11可持续城市和社区，13气候行动，还有15陆地生物，大概这样7个优先审查的目标。我们整个的报告了7个优先审查的指标的主要的进展，共审计了100余项关键的指标，在39个实践领域审查了141项具体的措施，然后还包括大致有30项的典型案例，这是我们整个报告的主要情况。这里考虑到今年的世界城市它的主题与气候相关，就是我们这里选择了 SDG 13，就在 PPT 里面，今天的报告里面，我们选一个 SDG 13气候行动作为典型案例来展示一下我们优先审查的内容。大家可以看一下，如果大家以后对我们这个上海的志愿审查报告感兴趣的话，我们的官方文件会上报到就是联合国官方网，我们可以再进行交流。就是这个是我们近年来气候行动目标的主要进展，包括以下几个方面：天气预报的准确率不断提高，其中的一条；灾害天气风险预警能力提升，碳交易量位居中国的前列等等，这些都是我们目前在气候行动方面的一些进展。进一步的，我们可以对该目标下面的实践领域、具体措施和典型案例进行审查，比如说实践领域包括气候变化影响的评估工作、推进碳交易平台等等5个方面，我们可以具体的可以看到这中间一栏。然后在后面就是在建立，就是我们可以再看到，在建立气候变化影响评估模型、开展气候适应举措下面，我们选择了气候变化背景下慢性阻塞性肺病风险预报服务等等作为典型案例进行展示。所以关于优先审查内容，我们就先介绍到这里。最后我们就是有一个简单的展望，就是我们知道在后疫情时代，我们知道在全球城市都面临着实现可持续发展目标的重要的一些工作，还有巨大的挑战。面向未来和我们市民的需要，上海积极打造一座就是我们上海最近出的一个文，就是人民的城市，打造一座人人都有人生出彩的机会，人人都能有序参与治理，人人都能享有品质生活，人人都能切实感受温度，人人都能有归属认同城市，这个是上海目前重要的一个方向。所以在这个基础上，上海我们将在面向全球发布此份报告的基础上，我们也希望能够把编写上海的自评估报告作为上海推动城市可持续发展的一个常态化的工作。好的。我的汇报大概都到此结束谢谢大家，谢谢主持人。
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that very, very interesting example and perfectly to time. that very interesting example of the thought process behind the VLR to begin with, and then the process of developing it, of setting priorities, of establishing measures, putting in place the analysis, the baseline, and that example on climate was very useful as well. I like the fact that your VLR will not stop at the first and only VLR, but you said you intend to make it an integral part of your urban strategy, which is absolutely fundamental, and which we are going to talk a little bit about that today with our panel. So thank you, Dr. Zituan, for that presentation, and we will hear some reflections from the panel on your amplification of the Shanghai VLR. Very good. Let's move now to our panel, and it's my absolute pleasure. Let me introduce the panelists to you straight off. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Ville Tajama, who's the Sustainable Development Goals Project Manager for the city of Espoo, Finland, whose interests are in innovation and education and how these approaches can be used to promote global sustainable development. Ville holds a Doctor of Science, Technology and Engineering Education from the University of Turku. Then we have from another corner of the world, Mariana Camisa, Strategic Coordination and Monitoring Manager from Buenos Aires. Mariana is an international relations person. She has an MA in International Peace Studies from the United Nations mandated University of Peace. She's worked at the UN in political affairs at the UN Office of in Geneva, and she currently works in the Buenos Aires city government in localizing the 2030 agenda. Then, of course, we have a representative from Madrid, Nicolas Garbi, who's the principal advisor for city diplomacy and international affairs at the Madrid City Council. He was previously the policy coordinator for global urban policy at the European Commission and was very much involved in negotiating the new urban agenda. We also have from Izmir, Mr. Sami Serkan Nebioglu, who works in the Foreign Relations Department of Izmir Metropolitan Municipality. He has a master's degree in international relations from the Dublin City University in Ireland. And last, but absolutely not the least, we have Dr. Edlam Abera Yameru, who's the chief of urbanization, the urbanization section at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Edlam has been an old friend and a colleague at UN Habitat. Before this, she led a number of normative and operational programs at UN Habitat, and she's also co-authored several editions of our Global Report on Human Settlements. Edlam has a PhD in Human Geography from the University of London. So we have a dynamic, very interesting, very important panel and some very important reflections ahead. Let me start with Ville. Let's start. Let's maybe take a few rounds of questions rather than long presentations. So 2 to 3 minute responses. And I'll start with Ville. This is not the first session where you're sharing Espoo's work on VLRs, but I know that many new things are happening every day at the city level that emerged from the VLR experience. Can you tell us a bit more which processes the VLR has triggered across city departments and how it's further inspiring new development initiatives? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shipra. First, it's a great privilege to be here. Wonderful discussion, wonderful sessions, starting from the very first keynotes, and great privilege to be in this particular section as well, an excellent keynote. To start with, I think that just one kind of sentence about the VLR. So for us, it was a VLR process was a way to see where we are, of course, kind of like a present state analysis, what is it that we are doing in order to achieve the SDGs, but also a kind of future foresight, where we want to be. And I think this future aspect can be quite useful in terms of seeing that what is it that you actually want to do. One thing that before going into what is it that we're actually now driving forward is that for us, the city strategy is of paramount importance. So that's like a 4 or 5 year strategy that we do. Our new strategy was just accepted this Monday. And it's something that we do with our political decision makers. It's something that we do with our organizations, but also with 6-year-old kindergarten children, where we map what is it that we want to do. And this is what I want to talk about, that or to mention that the next step from VLR process is now that we will embed the SDGs into everything that we do. Of course, including procurement, budgeting, communication, etc. But most importantly, the strategy process. So now that if we have, let's say, a quite abstract city-level strategy, the next step is that all the departments and all the units will create their own strategy. What is it that this kind of high-level story means for us? And that process we are doing directly to linking them to SDGs. We are using a sense-making process, perhaps later on something about that, but to really find out that if we want to be a forerunner city, then you have to be able to measure and lead this work through SDGs, and that's what we are doing now with our organization partners and stakeholders. I would love to talk more, but perhaps to respect time.
We'll come back. I have some follow-ups, and the sense making is an important one. We want you to do to build on a bit later, but thank you for that. And I found this very interesting. The embedding of the SDGs in everything, in the city strategy, in the departmental strategies, potentially in departmental action plans. You know, that's absolutely fundamental and central. And that is really what we talk about: localization, embrace of the SDGs fully at the local level. So thanks for that. And we'll come back on the sense making as a follow-up. Let me give the floor to Mariana. Mariana from Buenos Aires. As I already said, the city of Buenos Aires has been at the forefront of SDG localization. 3 VLRs already. What are you seeing as the benefits of monitoring the localization of SDGs on such a regular and periodic basis? How are these VLRs helping you in your own planning processes?
Hi, Shipra, how are you? So good to see you again. So yes, 3 VLRs definitely has not been easy, especially taking into consideration the last 1.5 to 2 years. As you all know, I don't think I have to explain that. But for us, we took this commitment of producing a VLR annually, mainly for many reasons, but mainly because it allows us to systematize, disseminate, and debate the city we want in the long term. And it also is a process of revision for us annually to see where we're standing, where we need to improve, the most important thing, and also an accountability process towards the citizenship, towards other strategic actors in the city. You know, the development, the SDGs and development agendas require the coordination with other actors. So how we expect to have that coordinated work if we from the government don't report on it. So that engaging in the pursuit of sustainable development and it also favoring an inclusive governance. So as you said, I'm sure as you have heard me said before, the VLR is a process, right? It's a dynamic process. And I think this is very important to keep in mind that it is at least for us, it is in constant search of improvement. So I'd like to make 2 points here. Number one, and also following on last year's experience, when we started producing our second VLR, the pandemic hit. And I'm sure as in Buenos Aires, in many cities around the world, we have to quickly adapt our governments to respond to the crisis, right? And I think partly in Buenos Aires, this response was as quickly as it was because we had a long-term plan with goals that guide us the path, the way, and also we have a centralized management method that allowed that quick implementation. So this flexibility and dynamic qualities that our report has, they also merge into the city planning in general, you know? And so although the current scenario calls for a new analysis for the social, economic reconstruction for the future, our horizon and goals to 2030 and 2050 are still the same. I think that's the first relevant point on the VLR. And the other point, and this is in terms of improving the report, I think exchange with our peers around the world, spaces like this one, when we get together and talk for 2 hours about one single process, it's what makes us get better every year, find new ways to report data, find new policies that maybe we can take from the city of Shanghai or Espoo and implement them in Buenos Aires. And also, you know, with the VLR global movement, we have found better ways to be accountable. If you see our 3 VLRs, I'm sure you can see an improvement from the first one, where we only reported 1 indicator or 2 for each SDG, and then we decided to include the 17 SDGs in all the reports, although we're highlighting 3 or 4. We have also implemented guidelines from policies of Buenos Aires that can be implemented anywhere in the world, and more resources to, you know, further contribute to this community of practices.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mariana. And, you know, learning, being a learning city is what this is about, isn't it? Learning every year, both from your own processes, but also from the global evolution of this VLR process and community. Very, very important. I like the fact that you said the horizon remains the same. We have to look at recovery. Yes, we have, you know, we have a few detours to make, but the horizon, the end goal remains the same. So thank you for those 2 very powerful thoughts. Let me go to Nicola. Nicola, the city of Madrid has been long at the forefront of international city diplomacy. You've supported a lot of key international processes, including with us, the development of the urban monitoring framework. And now Madrid has committed to develop a VLR. What is the reason that has pushed Madrid to prepare your first VLR? Is it learning from Buenos Aires, for example, or others? And then what do you expect from this process?
Well, first of all, hi Shipra, nice to see you again, and thank you to the whole One Habitat team and to the Shanghai city for inviting us. And it's so good actually to see so many friends on the screen. I'm really hoping that in a few months we'll be together. By the way, yeah. So actually, it's true. I mean, for us, it's this process is of prominent importance for the mandate, you know, of the municipality, and it's actually quite difficult, you know, to pick one reason, because in reality, the powerfulness of a tool like a VLR, and I would say, you know, of a tool. Allow me this expression, as the 2030 agenda and the targets and the indicators. I mean, it gives you the opportunity to actually reach so many objectives as a city. So if I have to pick one, I will actually pick the one that corresponds to our first duty, that actually is deliver good policies to our citizens. So this is actually, let's say, the first reason why we are taking this process so seriously. Of course, there is another, let's say, external dimension to the city, that is the importance of, in reality, you know, continue to advocate at our national, regional, and global level on the importance of the local and regional governments, and this we do it together with other cities and regions, and of course learning from others, and of course from from Buenos Aires, for instance, or Los Angeles, showed before an incredible presentation. It's one of these activities. But if I must say, let's say our focus, first of all, it's how to improve the public policies within the municipality, trying to focus on, let's say, on few aspects. One is data. So, I mean, we absolutely need to have much stronger evidence to support our policy cycle. The second one is to increase the capacity for financing critical infrastructure of the cities, and not just infrastructure, but also social services that are absolutely needed. And the third point is actually to increase our capacity of partnership. And this, of course, has an direct impact on data and on financing capacity. And all this to concretely have outputs that can improve legislation. So at municipal level, of course, depending on our competencies, on our strategic planning, and of course, again, on our capacity to invest in the plans we will be designing. So the VLR exercise, it's let's say a milestone that we see in a process, and this is actually the most important thing, the process for us. It gives us the opportunity to have a deadline to start deliver on and build up all these ambitious objectives. And really at the same time, I think it's a wonderful collective learning process, because actually we are trying to find the right way, the right indicator framework, the right reporting system together. And this is actually an amazing experience too.
Thank you. And that's very, very important. Again, the collective learning process. But as you said, both internal and external objectives. Internal to the municipality and to the city, but external both in terms of advocacy on the importance of local regional governments, attracting finance to the right investments. I think that's an important one, as well as building up the community of practice and contributing to that community of practice. Very, very important reasons. I'm going to go next to Sami from Izmir. Sami, if you're online, and then to Adlam to round off this first round of discussion. Sami, Izmir has just published its first VLR. I was there at the recent summit where your mayor was showing the VLR. What pushed Izmir to start developing its first local review, and what do you expect to come out of this?
Thank you very much, first of all, and all the viewers. Thank you for listening. Well, motivation, actually, it's a must, we think. It's obvious that we have to work on sustainable development goals. That's why globally and locally, we need to find solutions for environmental, social, and welfare problems in all the world. That's why I see it as a must for all cities and all stakeholders in our region and in the world. The second one is we have to speak through common language, locally and globally, I think. And sustainable development goals is a key in this concept, because if we can work on sustainable development goals together in local, it means that we are going to affect upwards and global stakeholders as well. For example, in our city, we have seen that many stakeholders are working on sustainable development goals. They are spending money, they are giving their time to different projects, but they do not know each other. Actually, they don't know what is going on in the whole city. And it's the problem, I think, because money is something is limited and time is limited and environment is at risk as well. That's why we need to use them economically. And we see VLR as a progress way that every city can implement in their region. This is the second motivation we have in our city. And the third one, it's obvious for all cities, I think, localization of SDGs. It means that for us, what is the zero hunger for us? Because as we know, hunger is different concept for every region, for every city, for every continent. That's why we started this job to find the meaning of SDGs for our local meanings. This is three key concepts that we focused on in our city to start VLR. Otherwise, there are random things going on in our city, but to collect them in a table, we find VLR very useful and colorful way to progress and implement SDGs in our city, I can say, as an answer for your question.
Fantastic. I like that. There are random things going on and we need to collect them. And I think, was it Mariana who said systematize them? So I think that's an important one. And then present them and then build momentum around them. But finding the meaning of SDGs at the local level for yourselves. What does it mean? And that
it
is
means that
fundamental.
I can actually, this is really exciting point of VLR, working on VLR, I can say, because for example, in our VLR, we have collected over 100 institutions from our city. They came from civil society, public organizations, and private sector, and we discussed that we put global indicators into the table, and we discussed that what indicators we need to use in our region, in our city, to be successful in SDGs implementation. Or we discussed sub-goals, what their meaning should be in our city. We discussed with them as well. It means that we only can find our indicators if we can find our indicators, or if we can find our sub-goals. This is the only way that we can be successful in sustainability, I can say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much for really grounding that for us. Very important. Let me now go to Edlem. Edlem, we said in the beginning that this exponential growth of VLRs has been, over the last year, has been concentrated mainly in, has been driven mainly by Europe and Latin America. But that is not to say that the prospects in Africa are not encouraging. You're leading technical assistance to several subnational authorities to conduct VLRs in Ghana, in Cameroon, in Zimbabwe. Together, we are developing the regional guidelines with the ECA and UN Habitat. Do you really think VLRs can become the tool, or the tool to accelerate the achievement of SDGs across the continent?
Hi, Shipra. Always nice to see you and your smile. Hello to the other panelists. Pleased to be here with you. So I'm here from the UN Economic Commission for Africa, as Shipra said. Just to quickly say that the Economic Commission for Africa is a regional entity of the UN, and there are 5 other UN entities with similar functions. So we work with our African countries on their development efforts, their policies, social, economic, environmental, multi-dimensional policy making. So a lot of our operation is regional, national. So I come to this from sort of a different scale, if I can say. And it's an interesting level from which to look at the VLRs, because we're looking at VLRs across countries, right? And then looking at it in connection to regional dynamics, regional priorities, regional processes in Africa. So I think the short answer to your question, Shipra, is absolutely yes. And I think we are very, I suppose, pleasantly surprised by what we are seeing so far, the progress we're seeing, the interest we're seeing, not just among local governments, but also national governments are equally interested in sort of accelerating VLRs and expanding VLRs in the region. Let me just say very briefly, Shipra, why we think VLRs are truly transformational. Of course, for me, one of the issues is that this whole push for localizing the SDGs, and for us in Africa, we also have our own 50-year plan, the Agenda 2063. This is not new, and I think many of you have been involved in this space for so long, right? The need to localize the SDGs and sort of advocating for that. But the VLRs have turned out to be such a profoundly powerful tool in accelerating the recognition, the appreciation around the importance of localizing the SDGs in Agenda 2063. I mean, we've been trying to do this and we continue to do it. But suddenly the VLRs are just really powerful in getting us towards greater localization of the SDGs, but also Agenda 2063. So in Africa, we really see VLRs as an instrument for applying a local lens across all development efforts, across all sectoral policies and strategies, from a multi-level perspective as well. I think one thing that's important for our context in Africa is that VLRs are already providing a much more nuanced, locally specific and spatially targeted insight into what's happening with development, with the SDGs and progress. And such locally specific understanding is super important so that our interventions are tailored, targeted, and really able to generate the returns on investment that we need, particularly in a resource-constrained environment, in Africa. Certainly one thing that we've all talked about in many of these forums, and we are seeing it very practically in Africa, is the increased engagement between local and national governments. The VLR is facilitating that beautifully so. So we take that as something that has really a profound impact. One thing I want to emphasize is that, like other regions, as Africa is really tackling a number of key challenges that are not only local but national, we want to use VLRs to emphasize that there are huge untapped opportunities at the local scale to tackle continental challenges such as economic growth, domestic resource mobilization, climate change, and really talk to the untapped local opportunities using VLR. So we've made great progress. We have a guideline with UN Habitat, United States Local Governments of Africa. And in fact, the demand for support on VLRs is growing in leaps and bounds. So absolutely, I mean, huge opportunities, Shipra, and I think we have a lot to look forward to.
Thanks very much. And if I were to pick out one sentence, it's applying the VLRs are the tool to apply a local lens across all development efforts. I think that's absolutely, absolutely fundamental. But I like your emphasis and your notation that national governments are equally interested in asking for this support, which is quite pleasantly surprising, isn't it? In some ways, in Africa as in many other parts of the world. But perhaps Ville can come back on this because Finland is a great example, as you've seen from our latest guideline with UCLG, of multi-level governance and the link between national and local. So picking up on Edlem's point, Ville, that there is interest of national governments, in advancing local level reporting. How did you in ESPO build the relationship between your level and the national level? And how did these processes help you?
Shipra, to start with, I have to say, in the very first days we were a little shy. Do we really want to connect the Prime Minister's office or not? No. Well, I think. Well, I can only mention in the kind of the Finland and Espoo case, and I think these are all a bit culture and context driven in many ways. The Prime Minister's office was very active and supportive, and this was, I'd say, now looking back, this was very important. Perhaps more important now, now that I get to reflect upon that. The VLRs tend to be a bit more structured, and I think there's a bit more guidelines to how voluntary national reviews need to be. Sorry for the VNRs. So and I think the message from what they communicated from the government was that VLRs can be more flexible, and please use that. Make a voluntary local review that really serves your needs, and that's what we did. And in addition, I think what was really helpful was that we worked together with other cities as well. Helsinki had just reported, I think, previous year, and Turku, city of Turku, also one of the 6 largest cities in Finland, was doing their review at the same time. So we had several workshops together with the voluntary national review team and with the voluntary local review teams from different cities. And these workshops were very fruitful and productive. And then it ended up such that we had our VLR spread 2 pages in the VNR, and of course vice versa. So I can perhaps the point being here that it's very helpful and productive. So I would absolutely recommend to work on that collaboration.
And I'm sure we will learn from your experience of that collaboration. Not being shy in approaching the national government and working with them and reaching out to them. I think it's very important. But I like your point about flexibility. Edlam also mentioned nuance. VLRs can dive deeper. There is no set format. They can be much more flexible. They can examine certain dimensions much more deeply, but also they can give a spatial perspective, which VNRs don't. So in some ways, go ahead.
Just a quick comment. I think UN Habitat could be a very strong supporter here, giving local government leadership kind of the mandate to say that you should support your VLR teams to connect with the governments and vice versa, of course, to give guidelines to the government to actively engage local governments. I think this is a clear win-win. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And again, the economic commissions are a great player in terms of making the connections to the VNRs, because of course they guide in the regions, the development processes of these VNRs. So really a lot in terms of synergy and synergetic work. Thank you for that, Vele. Mariana, I want to come to you with a slightly different question, because of course climate and national agendas, things like climate are usually addressed at the national level, the NDCs, the others, and again slightly from the point of view of national local link, but also from a thematic point of view. Buenos Aires has been promoting a lot of climate action. Are you able to link your work on climate with the VLR process, but also does the work on climate locally link with the work on climate nationally? I want to keep pursuing that line on national local also a little bit.
Yes, so we're doing a lot of work in climate action, and I think this is the great next urgency, right? As you said before, many crises are coming. Most of them, I think they will be related to climate change. And the difference between the pandemic and climate change is that the pandemic effects, the negative effects, were almost immediate, but the climate action, they are horizontal, and they hit the most vulnerable populations also. So in this case, I'm connecting it to the VLR. I think it's important not what you do, but how you do it, right? So in 2017, we committed to be a carbon neutral, resilient, and inclusive city by 2050. So this year, we launched our third climate action plan in collaboration with C40 that establishes a roadmap on how we're going to become that city. And here, to design this plan, the SDG approach was crucial. First of all, this plan is fully linked with the SDGs and, of course, the Paris Agreement, but especially because the tools that the SDG provide. For example, SDG 16 and the good governance and open government approach, and how as a government we don't have all the answers to tackle climate change, and how we need the coordination here with the national governments, with companies in the cities, with civil society organizations, with our residents, with all the strategic actors of the city. So this plan is the result of a joint and participatory work between a multiplicity of actors, the scientific community, the academic institutions, and all those I mentioned above, also international organizations. And also the plan takes into consideration, of course, evidence-based climate data, so you have a robust, coherent, transparent analysis of what you need to do. So we have also opened 30 public environmental data sets, They are all in a website that it's called VA Climate Action that combines public environmental information, accountability, because we report all our progress of the climate action plan there, but also civic activation. How do we want to engage with citizens, with civil society groups, so everyone can make their part. I'm going to do some promotion here. This platform, we documented all the process of co-creating with experts and civil society groups, so anyone in the world can take this example and implement it in their city. We are, of course, available for any consultations, and a part of the platform is also in open source format, which is great because it allows us to maximize resources, around the world. And coming back to, to the coordination with the national government, I think it's more, we're not at that level yet in terms of climate action per se. Like maybe we are collaborating in a technical capacity with the SDGs and the VLR, but I think it's the next natural step. But we are collaborating with other cities in Argentina. This year we launched the Cities for Climate Partnership, which is compromised with I think there are 14 cities right now. Most of them are capital cities of subnational governments, and they sum up almost half of the population of Argentina. So it's another way, how we're coordinating our efforts to be more resilient.
Fantastic. I think this is so important. So it's not just the vertical, but it's also the horizontal coordination, and not just for climate. It's for also for the SDGs. And I like the fact that you said, we use the SDG approach for our climate action plans, because ultimately they're two sides of the same coin. We're not talking about two different things.
Yes, and it gives you the tools. Sorry, just the tools, how you can apply them in other contexts.
Absolutely. And thanks for that promotion, by the way. It's a promotion not just of your own work, but it's an open offer for anybody who wants to seek your advice and your input. So that is very welcome indeed. Before I go to Nicola, there are some questions in the chat, not in the chat, in the Q&A. So in case in the meantime, some of you want to respond, there was already a question on how do VLRs feed into the VNR, and I think Vela, you mentioned that a little bit, in case you'd like to give a few more details in the Q&R. And how do we access Izmir's VLR? So maybe if there's a website, Sami, you may want to put that in there. But let me go back to this question about horizontal coordination, which horizontal linkages between cities, which Mariana, you mentioned, collaboration with other cities in Argentina, and put that to Nicola a little bit. City of Madrid is developing a very comprehensive localization strategy. How will the VLR contribute to accelerate the implementation of this strategy, and how do you think it can foster horizontal coordination, coherence within the city between different local plans, but also around with the larger region, with other cities?
Okay, yeah, so in reality is extremely, it's an enormous question. So it's
you have only 2 minutes.
Well, voilà. So I have to pick up the scale. So in reality, I mean, just there's a joke, but not really. The fact that how the VLR exercise accelerate, the localization process. As I was saying at the beginning, I mean, just simply and stupidly putting us some concrete milestones so that can accelerate, because in reality the biggest effort, and the colleagues know it, is the internal coordination. So this is an enormous effort. It's extremely easy to work with other cities. Actually, actually other actors in the territory, especially from civil society and private sector. It's easy to work with the UN agencies and programs, with the European Commission, with everyone, but it's extremely complicated to work inside the house. And I think this applies to all the public institutions, by the way. So this is actually the real, let's say, reason why we have, let's say, a localization strategy that, first of all, is not a declaration, but it's a concrete commitment of the city council, not of the government of the city council. That's very important and gives horizon to 2030. And then the commitment to the VLR also not push us to have this, to accelerate the exercise within the house. So for this, we were actually able to finally have an argument for concrete internal coordination. So the first point has been to set up a governance, and the internal governance is based in reality on transversal working group. So we have, let's say, all the services, all the departments of the city that are represented by one person, and they participate to this working group. So this is actually the working space where everyone is actually represented, where the information is shared, where the decisions are taken or endorsed. So that's extremely important, the internal governance horizontally, interdepartmental, let's say. Then the other point was actually to create and identify structures. So we decided not to create a new one, but in reality to use the existing structure. Like, for example, we already have a data office that as an open platform where all the data are, let's say, available to citizens. The point of Mariana, this is key, increasing transparency and accountability. We already have it in Madrid. Now the issue is to connect it, to the process. So we use this structure, and then you also take the opportunity of other processes, and in this sense, let's say the post-pandemic recovery is a great push for us, because as you know, we are within the European Union. So in order to get, let's say, the opportunity to recover as a city, we need, first of all, to align with the policy objectives of the European Union and of our national level, Spain, but then also this will allow us to get the resources. So what we are doing is actually to harmonize the recovery strategy, and so the city strategy, and so the localization strategy, in a only comprehensive strategy that will, for necessity, provide data and bankable projects in order to get the resources to allow the recovery in the city. So we are taking this as an opportunity, and I must say it's much more complex, but if we are able to do it, the impact will be just structural. So then no one will question it. An SDG process within the house. The key work is to make understand to other departments they do not have to make additional work, but we have to support them in translate this.
Thanks, Nicola. Absolutely, I think it's very important to demonstrate and support them in this process of, this is not an add-on, extra work, extra to my work. That is, I think, the big piece of the resistance comes from there. I have to do my action plan for transport, and now I also have to do SDG, and now I also have to do climate, but they're the same thing. So I think it's important. And thank you for that wonderful compliment that it's so much easier to work with the UN. I think you're the only person in this world who believes that. So thanks very much. Let me go to a slightly another different thematic topic. We talked about climate with Mariana. Sami, you have a different, slightly interesting twist to your VLR with a different topic, which is culture. And I was, of course, in Izmir during the UCLG Culture Summit about a month ago. Tell us a little bit, very short, in a couple of minutes, why culture? Why does it have a special place in the VLR of Izmir?
We want to give different and special floor to culture because as you guess or as you see, culture is everywhere. Especially in SDG 11, we can see different place for culture or cultural buildings or cultural background of the cities, protection of them. We have seen them in SDG 11, but actually in zero hunger, in no poverty, in climate protection, we can see culture as a focal point in all of them as well. That's why I don't think that we need to see culture as a different thing. We need to see culture midpoint of every SDG, because this is the only way that we can create welfare depending on our cities or depending on our subjective culture. When we put them out of when we put culture out of the context, I don't think that we can find solution to social equality, for example, because in Western world or in our country, in Middle East, in Asia, there are different cultural types that we use in our social life. That's why to prevent hunger, to prevent cultural integrity or different things, we need to use culture as a tool, as a methodation of all SDGs, I can say. That's why we put different contexts to culture in our first VLR, but in the second one, we think that we are going to spread culture in all SDGs, and we are going to evaluate how we can use culture for every SDGs. In this one, we don't have enough time to put culture in every SDGs, but in the second one, we deeply think that we have to use culture in every SDG, I can say, as a short version of cultural integrity.
I like the fact that you have just launched your first VLR and you're already planning on how you will mainstream certain elements in your second VLR, which will be a few years away. So I think that's quite interesting.
And I need to add up one of the things to make it clear. For example, we separate SDGs 16 and 17 as well. In our maybe like I can say in our country, in our region, strong institutions or cooperation between stakeholders is a different thing. Actually, it's the methodology, not a goal. I can say we need to use these SDGs as a methodology to reach out the rest 15 SDGs, and culture is something like this. That's why these three things: culture, strong institutions, democracy, and cooperation between stakeholders is our methodology to accomplish SDGs in foreseen future. Yeah, thank you very much.
Fabulous, thank you, and that's very, very important. Edlam, we come back to you with a different scale, but something again which is very specific to the African continent. You mentioned Agenda 2063 in your opening intervention. Of course, the 2030 Agenda is not the only reference to promote sustainable urban development. In the African cultural context and geographic context, you have the Agenda 2063. Do you think VLRs can be used to promote ownership, monitoring, and implementation of something as specific as the Agenda 2063 and perhaps also the New Urban Agenda in Africa?
Yes, I certainly think so. Clearly in our region in Africa, we're looking at not just the global agendas, the New Urban Agenda, the SDGs, but again, the Agenda 2063. And what we've done in the Africa region so far is to integrate our work on the SDGs with our work on Agenda 2063. So we do work very closely with the African Union to ensure that as we work with countries, as we provide support to member states and countries themselves, look at the SDGs and Agenda 2063 in tandem. Fortunately, they have a lot in common, naturally. So yes, I mean, the applicability of the VLRs is certainly to the SDGs, but also to region-specific strategies. I think on the ownership piece and the commitment piece, that's probably one of the most powerful impacts of the VLRs, right? Even if it were not to impact implementation, which we wanted to. I think the part about VLRs, enabling dialogue, discussion, even awareness. I mean, our experience has been that in some cases, citizens may not know what the SDGs are, regardless of which region you're in. So I think if we don't land the SDGs down to that level, to the individual, to the community, then how do we move it forward? The same with Agenda 2063. And we've seen how the process component has been so powerful in the VLRs that we've conducted. And it has just fostered that dialogue that perhaps was not happening as much with communities, but also interestingly, not just communities, but the private sector, right? Which when we start thinking about mobilizing investments around the SDGs, the private sector becomes a key actor. And I think one of the speakers talked about how there's a lot happening in investments and interventions, but they're not necessarily or deliberately understood or linked to the SDGs. I mean, perhaps there are investments that are indeed supporting the SDGs, but how do we bring all of that together and look at it in a consolidated way? I think on the ownership and engagement discussion also, it's useful to look at it at different multiple levels. There is what happens within the local scale, government, communities, private sector, but the local national engagement, as we said earlier, is also key in the ownership piece. And I think when we think about the local to national, beyond levels and multi-level engagement, there's also multi-sector engagement. And I think we don't talk about that often enough, but VLRs actually encompass the whole range of sectors that national government deals with. So I think building in the commitment and ownership, local commitment and ownership around national sector policies is super key. On the local to local engagement that one of the speakers spoke about, I think that's part of the ownership and commitment, right? The local to local exchange within a country at the national level, but also extending it out to the region. For us in Africa, we see the local to local engagement as part of building that ownership and commitment around VLRs. And we do have a peer review process that we're building so that localities also engage with one another. And I think it's all of these that will then continue to build up the ownership, the commitment around both Agenda 2063 and the SDGs. So one last point is that it's super critical that, with the momentum around VLRs, we move towards institutionalizing the process for VLRs as an integral component of SDG coordination and monitoring at the country level. I think the interest is there, the momentum is there, but we need to institutionalize it in a way that is clear and is mandated in a sense and becomes part of countries' efforts to implement, monitor, and report on the SDGs. And I think we're moving in that direction, but that's where we want to get, basically.
Phenomenal. Oh, that's so important. And I want, that the point you said about local to local across the continent, doesn't that also help build up the collective local voice of local and regional governments in the dynamic, of implementing all these agendas? Otherwise, they're not even getting heard, So when they speak together, do you see that?
Oh, yes. Oh, it totally does. I mean, it's so much more powerful to see that local governments and localities across countries are coming together to speak to this agenda. And I think the interesting thing about VLRs for me is, interestingly, how it's diffused some of the usual tension that we see between national and local.
Yes.
It's kind of somewhat a slightly more acceptable entry point for, pushing for the local. At least that's been my experience. And then more localities speaking together is even more convincing. At least that's been our experience. And it has gone a long way when they have spoken in one voice and engaged and kind of put a voice to the agenda. So absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, very, very important. And, instead of pushing traditional arguments on devolution and decentralization, as you said, we are diffusing those those discussions, and the lines are not so important anymore as they get blurred. They don't remain that important anymore. Thanks, Adlam, and I'll come back to you with the final question in a second. But let me ask Ville, because he mentioned sense making. And we're getting into our final round of discussion where we're visualizing the way forward. I know Buenos Aires has some elements of visualizing their way forward. I know SPU and Finnish cities together are working on something called SDG sense making. So maybe in just a minute or so, if I can get from each one of you a sense of what is the way forward, where are we going from here? Ville, we'll start with you in the usual order.
Okay, 2 points. We've been talking a lot about indicators, and that's a very important topic. Now, question, a bit rhetoric one, but still, is a good indicator such that it describes the phenomena well? Or is a good indicator one that is being used? But there's no sarcasm in this, not at least intended one. We've realized that there's a myriad, a plethora of indicators. Pick and choose. That there's so many. We've learned that if we want to have indicators that are actually being used and managed and utilized, we need to do them together. It has to be a participatory process, and this has led and a painful one as well, by the way. This has led to a process where very smart, experienced people in our in our organization as well still tend to think that sustainable development is a synonym for ecological sustainability. This is the case. I mean, unfortunately. So there's a need to also understand the agenda, the SDGs, and holistic sustainable development more. So we had to create a tangible process where it's the SDG sense-making process essentially is a very hands-on workshop where, together with your local partners or your national partners or international partners, you create an understanding what is our strategy or our project or any given phenomena all about in the framework of holistic sustainable development, and how to create an indicator that's local and describes the need. I think in previous sections they used the term hyperlocal, and at the same time links directly to the multilateral targets and indicators. This is basically what it's all about. And I'll stop there to respect the time. Thank you.
Thank you, but I think it's interesting, sense making, just making sense of the SDGs in a very pragmatic way. And I liked your point about there's a zillion indicators out there. What is a good indicator? One that is used. I think that's a very, very important point. Okay, let's move on very quickly to some sense of what next from the other participants. Mariana, since 2016, of course, you have the National Council for Social Policy Coordination that has taken over the whole 2030 agenda work and portfolio and SDGs on behalf of the federal government. How are you seeing their role? Do you foresee greater horizontal coordination as part of their work, or more collaboration across local governments? Where do you see this going?
Yes, I think, especially now in this context of reconstruction that we're in, we need to, to further encourage the coordination and collaboration with the national government, but also with the other local governments, especially the ones we have next door. I don't know if you're familiar with Buenos Aires, where we have 3 million inhabitants, but usually 6 million people are in the city during the day. So the coordination with the metropolitan area is key for sustainable development. People come here to study, to work, to go to the doctor. So coordinating, I don't know, for example, ambulances, it's, key, and also in terms of climate change, the emissions don't stop at the city limits, right? So I think that's the way forward in terms with the other local governments. With the national governments, I think, and what I'm seeing a lot is to start including subnational and local governments within the VLR processes. In Argentina, that's not happening for now. They have a report that's called, I don't know, report of provinces, something like that. And we participated once, but it's not in terms of participation, it's in terms of coordination and, you know, doing the due process and going deeper and not just staying, you know, in statements and forwards and things like that. So it's hard to coordinate, but I think that's the next step we should take to make our VLRs and VNRs more, you know, aligned.
I think that's true, absolutely. And interestingly, also in Spain, going to Nicola, you know, Spain, national government, local, regional governments, they're all very vocal and very committed to the SDGs, you know, independent of each other. So a little bit building on Mariana's comment that, you know, the next step should be more coherence and more congruence and more alignment between these independent efforts to advance and implement the SDGs. Do you think Madrid is going to be able to achieve that through this VLR process, Nicola?
I think that it's about interdependence and let's say even subsidiarity. We can use it among the different level of governance, and so I mean it doesn't depend only on our will and on our capacity. So this is really something that we need to do together with all the level of governance we are directly involved in. So in this sense, it's I mean quite a tricky question for us because. As the colleague from Izmir was recalling at the beginning, the cultural aspect in reality is transversal and actually is pervading the whole agenda. And this happened even more in a localization process, and this also touched the culture of public and political institutions. So that's a context that is extremely particular in Spain, what's happening in terms of the relation between the multi-level governance and the VLR production process. So concretely, the will of the city of Madrid is exactly this. I mean, to provide a VLR that is not understood as something different of simply not bring what is our contribution as a city of Madrid. By the way, we are trying to collect not just what we are doing as a public local institution, so to policies and our municipal budget, but we are also channeling all the actions and investment that the other actors of the territory of the municipality are expressing. So this on one end, and then this exercise is actually to be given to the regional government, to the national government, to the European Union, to the UNECE, so our regional commission for Europe, and finally, at the global level. I must say that the national coordination is the most difficult for us because, of course, there is this cultural aspect of having quite a tense institutional relation when you have a political, difficult political relation. So you have this kind of difference that, for example, the difference between politics and policy do not really exist in the Spanish vocabulary, for just to make an example on culture. So in this sense, for us, it's not easy. What happened is that, yes, the Spanish government already provided a voluntary national review, the CPF, and there was recognized the contribution of the local and regional governments, and this was extremely positive. However, the problem is that the local and regional governments association that where we represent all of us I don't think they did, let's say, or they didn't have the possibility, to reflect exactly what we're doing at local and regional government. So you have an additional layer of complexity, that is that local authorities are represented by a network that has to do, of course, its own job too. So it's a complex situation here in Spain, but from the city of Madrid, of course, we understand this exercise as a contribute to, first of all, our national level, and then to the EU and the UNEC level of governance.
No, thanks very much. That's very important. And I like the way you weave culture into the political culture question, which is very, very important, absolutely fundamental. But perhaps what Edlam was saying earlier, that the dynamics of everybody's committed to the SDGs. Data needs to be collected. Some goals are common, and perhaps that will help diffuse the very polarizing politics that can sometimes happen between national and local levels. So quite an important dimension there. Let me move to do you want to come in, Nicola, on something?
Yeah, sorry, just to underline, because it's very important what you said, and I just wanted to underline the great importance of our regional commission and the global level. So as we have Edlam here with us, and you representing the leading program of the UN for our cities, I think it's extremely important that we do not have to, we have to know that we have allies in other cities, in the regional commissions, and in the UN system as a whole. This is something very important when things are not so easy, maybe in your national context. We have allies.
You're absolutely right. And Villa said this right in the beginning. He said, there is a role here that's very important for the international community, for UN Habitat and for the regional commissions. It's very, very, very fundamental sometimes in bringing these or putting these pieces together. The pieces are all there, but how to fit the jigsaw together needs sometimes a facilitator or a neutral actor, in that sense, an ally. And that's very important. Thanks, Nicola. Thanks for adding that. I think very, very, very major point. To Sami and to Edlam, let me move on the importance of a little bit, Sami first, on the importance of peer learning and peer exchange at a country level. What do you see? Because, of course, other local governments in Turkey are also preparing, some of them, their first VLRs. They're starting. Sultanbeyli is one of them, municipality. Are you working closely with them? And do you think there is common ground to be found with the others?
Actually, as you know, we are the first city that has prepared VLR in Turkey. I think Sultanbeyli is now coming afterwards. We don't have system to cooperate with. That is the problem, actually. We don't have a kind of structure, but UCLG, MEVA, exactly, they are helping us to cooperate with different municipalities in Turkey. When we have time, we are discussing how to move forward together about VLRs. And in countryside, we have problematic sites, as Nicolas mentioned just before, because in Turkey the system is complex. Central government is so strong that controls many things in local as well. Maybe it's same context in different countries as well, but in Turkey the situation is a bit different. But to solve the problem in local, first of all, we are going to create working groups in local level, and with indicators that we found out, we are going to invite big stakeholders in city related to indicators. For example, in education, we are going to invite some private education institutions and some central government representatives to find out what is the problem or what is the solutions of Izmir about SDG 4, for example. We are going to create that kind of working groups to move forward. And the most important thing, to find out, to determine how to monitor indicators, because from my perspective, it's the most important thing. Otherwise, it's just a report that we put our libraries and we are going to see our name and we are going to be happy. But I don't think that the main goal is that to solve this problem, we are going to work with local stakeholders and we are going to find out, we are going to push them to discuss that, how we can monitoring those indicators and how we are going to get ahead for 2013. This is the only way that we can move in Izmir. Shortly, I can describe about it, but for your question, for now, we don't have enough capacity to cooperate with different municipalities, but we have power to do it in our local.
Interesting what you said about, how we want to make sure that these reports don't just stay on the shelf, and gather dust. How do you make them real? And perhaps I stretch that argument to you, Adlam, a little bit on how do we make sure that these reports are, that the VLRs are actually supporting and reinforcing the work that the UN does at the country level also, that they don't just remain in the shelf and they don't, that how do VLRs, how do you see VLRs becoming an important instrument for the UN to do its programming well and better at the country level? So they don't just stay on the shelf.
Yeah, that's the question is for me or for Adlam?
No, for Adlam for now.
Okay,
For Adlam
okay.
for now, as the regional commission, how do they see it?
Okay.
But that point is so critical, and it was going to be one of my final points. Really, is you have a VLR, and then so what? I mean, the so what question is so critical, particularly because there's a huge demand for VLRs. We're seeing the numbers grow astronomically. So you wonder, well, we hope this is just not a hype, right? We really need to see it translating into something concrete, more implementable, at the very least, influencing planning, if not implementation. Right? So I think that's so super critical, and it's a worry that I already have, right? How do we actually move towards there? I think when it comes to the UN, the same applies, right? As we support VLRs and as countries increasingly prepare VLRs, it's incumbent upon us at all levels, right? Regional, but also country level operations, as you said, to build in VLRs and the local question into the support that we provide to member states as the UN. And what's interesting is that we need to recognize that in as much as national policymaking and perhaps governments may not have adequately localized the SDGs or Agenda 2063, we also need to do more, I think, in our UN support to member states to localize our support across sectors, across policymaking. So there's a lot for us to do. We do have the country system, the country teams and the country programs that we support. So it's a question of where is the local in that kind of country framework of the UN. One thing I would want to mention where regional commissions have quite a critical role. Every region reviews progress with the SDGs and reports on progress and discusses progress at what we call the regional forums on sustainable development. And until very recently, these regional forums on sustainable development, where all national governments come to discuss the VNRs, barely considered the local dimension. But that's changing now. So our role as a regional commission, and we've already been doing it, is to bring local governments and local authorities to that regional discussion of national governments. And the buy-in has been fantastic. The support has been fantastic. So I think at multiple levels, at the regional and national level, we have to build in the local question across our areas of support, just as we're asking national governments to do so and other decision makers. So I think that's what I would see as critical. I don't know whether you want me to speak to, or we're out of time, the three things that we see as critical for ECA, or this is it, Shipra. Up to you.
3 things in 30 seconds.
Absolutely, and I'll go very fast. Priorities for us as a region, as a regional commission, is scaling up. Nicholas, you talked about allies standing together stronger. I completely agree. We want to see VLRs triggering more VLRs, and it will make the voice louder. Secondly, I mean, the data piece is just really, really critical because we have such paucity in this respect. A final piece, and I think the bigger picture is the SDGs will end in 9 years, right? But we want this kind of localization of any development efforts to go beyond the 9 years. The SDGs are a particular framework. So we want the local scale and the local sort of the importance of the local to really be institutionalized in national policy making and in what member states are doing around their development efforts. So we see VLRs as getting us there, and that's kind of the big picture 20-year destination for us. Thank you.
See, I knew if I would give you the 3 points, it would make my life infinitely easier because now I don't have to summarize anything. Thanks very much for that, Edlam. Thank you, colleagues. I think this has been really phenomenal. So in addition to Edlam's 3 points of scaling up, data, and localization being a way of life beyond the SDGs, you know, whether it's the climate agenda, whether it's the post-2030 agenda, whatever that will be, whether it's Agenda 2063, whether it is your national agendas, you know, and your national strategic plans, whether it is the UN's cooperation frameworks and the country cooperation, the country's analysis and assessments, localization as being central is really a very important part of this movement. So I'm going to start from those 3 points and then try and build. Though I mean, how does one summarize something so rich and dynamic? It's absolutely impossible. But I think 2-3 things. VLR as a thought process, as a learning process. You know, that's very important. We talk about multiple VLRs from a city, and somebody says, so why are you doing this again and again? And Mariana gave one thing saying, every time we learn from ourselves and from others because the movement is growing, so we improve every time. And Sami said, well, we realize that culture is important to us, and we put it in a box in a chapter, but we realize that it's more than that, and next time we already want to mainstream it. You know, and Will is saying, you know, we did our VLR, but we were shy with making the link with the VNR, but the next time we can do that better. So I think the importance of this being a learning process, an internalization process, a process that becomes completely integral to our way of thinking, our way of planning, our way of execution, and ultimately our way of attracting finance to the right things to our cities is very important. We just had this side event that I was moderating on SDG, the SDG projects tool for financing, and we had a number of financing actors around the table, and they said, you know, SDGs are that common language that the financial sector never saw local actors and national actors speaking. So that becomes a common language, and that is absolutely that's absolutely important. Then the other bit on the internal and external role of VLRs was quite important. Came back again now, Edlam, through your point about, you know, the movement. And Nicola, you made this point originally that the VLR is important to us internally in the city, but then it becomes an important advocacy tool externally at the national level, at the regional level, at the global level. The more we have, the louder the voice of local governments in asking and highlighting their contribution, not just asking. I think that's a very important point. Then the point about diffusing tensions around, traditional tensions around national and local dynamics and political relationships. And can the VLRs, with their commonality with VNRs is the framework, the SDGs, the importance of data, you know, the importance of collective ownership. If those are common ground between national and local, can it help bridge and diffuse those traditional contrarian sort of dynamics that have existed between national and local for since the beginning of time, I think. And then the point about the flexibility of VLRs, which we should not lose in our guidance. I think, Edlam, this is an important point for us as well, as we develop guidance and, you know, as UN Habitat, as ECA. But the beauty of VLRs is their flexibility, that they are not in a box. structured the way VNRs are. And we need to make sure that whatever guidance we provide, we maintain that flexibility, that ability to nuance, that ability to contextualize, that we don't lose that in the process of providing guidance. I think the importance of the UN in terms of facilitating both peer-to-peer relationships, peer-to-peer learning, as well as the national, regional, local, multi-level coherence and support, as well as providing the amplifier, the voice, was quite well articulated. And my final point, I think, is really this is not about creating new structures. And I think this is so important. As the UN or as any other actor, if you just go and say, collect, here's now a new set of data to collect, here's now a new set of plans to prepare, here's now a new set of things that you need to do to be fashionable or acceptable in the international community. No. I think the point of integrating this within existing structures, existing systems, looking at the most relevant indicators that may already be in place, rather than us developing new ones, and pushing local governments, which are already limited in their capacity and their time, to do this kind of thing, to really facilitate their job and not make it more difficult and put more burden on them, I think is a very important point. I'm sure I've missed out a lot, but that's in the nature of these things. All that is left is to say there are a lot of resources in the chat already, from Finland, from Buenos Aires, from Habitat, from others. Please do capture those before you leave this session somehow. And a big thank you to Shanghai for hosting us, to Dr. Deng for his keynote, to each one of you, Mariana, Ville, Sami, Nicola, Edlem. Thank you so much, and to our participants, and to our team behind the scenes, Martino, Claudia, many colleagues who have worked behind the scenes on this. Thank you. Another powerful conversation to take this agenda forward. Thank you all, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shipra. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Shipra.
Thank you,
all.
colleagues.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.